All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and some more folks might pop in as we go. Thank you all for taking some time to spend with us this morning. This is the partner training for 2020. We have today's session at 10 a.m. is the equity filter and program design session. So today we will be talking about how to use an equity filter as a tool. So what we're going to go through is what is an equity filter, how you use it, and kind of how it relates back to racial equity. So we're going to start by talking about the tool, how it works, give an example, and then we'll go through kind of how we might use this in the future, as well as some decisions we've made with it so far. Just a little etiquette for the Zoom call. Everybody's going to be muted as they join, and if you wouldn't mind, please stay muted until question and answer time. You can put a question into the chat box, and our lovely moderator Hector will keep track of those for us. And then at the end of the session, we'll do some questions. And then when you are speaking, if you would just say this is, so folks can recognize who it's speaking. And then we are recording this session. So all of these will be available on the partner portal after we've finished. The CASA agreements that we have on here are really just another tool that we use towards our equity work. So at CASA, we've come up with this list of agreements of that we all want to try our best to do in meetings and trainings together. I mostly have these in here today as an example of the types of things that I mean when I say tools towards equity work. So these agreements are one way that we recenter ourselves and we remind ourselves of the commitments that we have to one another. So if anyone wants to add more agreements for this session, certainly feel free to put them in the chat. If anyone disagrees with any of these agreements, does not want to practice these here, feel free to put that in the chat as well. But we do like to kind of have some ideas about how we're going to engage together. Quick intro, I'm Lane. I'm one of your co-hosts for this session. I did used to have pet peacocks, and my house has burned down before, so the fires are very reminiscent of hard times for me. If you want to talk to me about technical assistance for IDA, that's my main job. I also love talking about reparations and student loan forgiveness. My co-host is Yvette. Yvette, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I think I've met most of y'all in person at some point. My about me for now is if you want to talk about general IDA questions, sometimes I can help answer them because I spend so much time just like osmosing off of Lane. I sometimes get random calls asking for technical assistance. Sometimes I can do it, sometimes I can't, but I am here for right now. Normally I would have my about me asking about innovative changes and things like that. However, I hope you all saw the news, we will be scaling down at the end of December. So we're not really doing any type of advertising or going over those programs that we offered. So for now, just talk to me about general IDA things. I could probably help you out. Also talk to me about where to eat in Portland when it's not so smoky anymore and we can get takeout again. Fun facts, Libra Sagittarius, almost in my season. I'm excited. Yeah, and I am a very happy plant owner, and when it's, able to go outside, I do enjoy going hiking and going and looking for waterfalls. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Yvette. And I did already tell y'all Hector is moderating, so thank you, Hector, for helping out with that. So I just wanted to give a little context for why we're talking about equity, why we're talking about an equity filter. In our 2019 contracting with all of our VITA and MCSP partners, we did ask all of the VITA boards to commit to racial equity. And what that looked like was different for each organization, but in general, it was a resolution passed at the board level that says that you will use IDA funds to advance racial equity as best you can, right? That is the goal, to get more funds to the places where they're needed most. I mentioned the agreements as one type of tool we use. Another tool that we use is an equity filter. And the reason these tools can be so important is that we all play a role in this, and our organizations all play a role in racial inequity. And so when we start to think about how can we make changes in this world, one of the ways that we can think about that is, what tools do we have available? So I did put a little definition for gatekeeping up here. The truth is, we're all gatekeepers. Everyone on this call has some power at their workplace, whether that's helping a saver complete their financial education in time, whether it's making the decision of who gets enrolled or who doesn't, whether it's the amount of time you put in trying to contact someone before you decide that they are unreachable. We are all every day making these little decisions that have a big impact on other people. And I kind of wanted to put this little flow chart in here: governments, leadership, you, clients, just to kind of point out that while we feel very, very powerless and very hopeless these days, and it seems that there's so much outside of our control, there are also things that are within our control. So while it's so true that the federal government and the state government and city governments and your board and your executive directors are all making decisions that have huge impacts on your life every day, we're also making decisions that have impacts on the lives of our coworkers and our clients as well. So I really just want to give some of that as context and background for why we're talking about this tool today. Up here, I have a little power and impact analysis graph. And the reason I wanted to put this in here is just so folks can kind of start thinking about who holds power and who's impacted, and where do those two groups line up, or where are they separate. So you can kind of see on this chart here that government bodies, board, funders, are the folks who have a lot of power in this field, right? And the folks who generally are most impacted by the decisions we make are clients, contractors, documented folks, and the loved ones and communities of our staff. So while we all have a role to play, sometimes the folks who are most impacted by the decisions also have the least say in them. So one of our goals with using an equity filter is kind of considering who's impacted and who's holding the power in this situation. So I definitely recommend you do a little power and impact analysis for your own organization. This is CASA's. I think it's really a good exercise to kind of look at who's holding power and who's impacted in different parts of the organization. The other reason we use this equity filter is because impact is not the same as intent. So I assume that every single one of us in this field have the very best intent. I wake up every day assuming that y'all are doing everything you can for your clients, and that everything you do comes from the best part of your hearts. It doesn't mean that nothing that we ever do is impactful or harmful. So I put a little graphic in here because I think so much of conflict comes up when someone is doubting someone else's intention based on the impact it had on them. So I'd really like for everybody to kind of start from a place of assuming that the intentions were good, and that now we have to assess the impact and look at the real life implications of what those intentions did. So here's an example of CASA's equity filter. Um, it has a lot on it, and I mostly wanted to put this slide in so folks have a sense of the kind of visual flow chart aspect of it. One way you can use this filter is by selecting one circle and answering all the questions in that circle. Another way you could use it is taking one question out of each circle. And then the other way that you can use it is actually looking at every single one of those questions. And I would say for a big programmatic decision, if you can ask yourself each one of these questions, and then kind of use this evaluation, how are we going to report this back and how are we going to follow up on it? It's a really good map to making a decision, putting it out in the community, and kind of hearing back. So the first circle there is surface assumptions. And so we want to know, how will these outcomes increase or decrease racial equity? So the first time I started looking at the tool, this word outcomes was a little confusing for me. So what I'll use here is decision instead of outcomes. And so an example is the decision we made to go forward with the training right now. So we did sit down as a team and say, how will moving forward with this training increase or decrease racial equity? How will moving forward with this training increase or decrease inclusivity? And how will moving forward with this training keep us engaged in relationship with one another? By asking ourselves all of those questions, we started to kind of have a good idea of whether or not we should move forward. Then we move on to who needs to be engaged here, right? Are we intentionally engaging multiple perspectives? Do we have enough information from people in different parts of the state who are having different experiences with the smoke and fire? Are all those perspectives being given equal value or being given the value that they need? And then are we creating access to multiple perspectives and information? So access is kind of a nod towards creating different types of spaces for people to give access or to give information. So that might be an email or in person or a survey or a video, just so you give folks different ways to engage. And then are we giving ourselves enough time? So, that decision had to be made real quick. We don't have a lot of time. What can we do? A huge part of this, and one of my favorite uses of the equity tool, is this communicated. When and how will processes, decisions, policies, and practices be communicated? How will you ensure communication takes place in an inclusive, culturally sensitive, and responsible manner? And where do we need to improve feedback loops? So again, with the decision to continue forward with the training, we decided we would communicate it out to you via email on a specific time, which we did by last Friday. We could have sent that email in Spanish as well, just to be a little bit more inclusive. We know our specialists speak English as well, but just that could have been one thing we could have done differently. And where do we need to improve feedback loops? Well, we know that a lot of the folks in crisis from the fires probably didn't respond to our survey. So what can we do to improve that communication? What adverse impacts or unintended consequences could happen? What are people's concerns? How do we surface everyone's voices on scales relative to impact? So again, how could it actually negatively impact folks if we didn't have the training or if we did? What are the needs and concerns of the community, the team, the other specialists? And how do we make sure that the folks who are most impacted are the ones who we hear the loudest? So show of hands, you can either give me a little thumbs up or actually give me a show of hands on your little video, but does anybody recognize this logo? Okay, I saw a hand. Yeah, a couple folks. Anya, do you want to tell us what this logo is from?
Yeah, I actually, this was, at least I called Insecure. They work with an organization called We Got Y'all, where it's supposed to reach out to children that might need more help in their education, but then they end up basically just targeting Black children specifically, and it comes off a little insensitive when you look at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this logo is from Insecure, as Anya said, and there's actually a whole episode where they're kind of delving into the impact of this logo on their communities. And, you know, the main character kind of says, well, it's the white hand and there's little Black people in it. And isn't that a little problematic? And we got y'all. I know you're trying to be cool, but it doesn't really sit very well. And then the white executive director gets so upset and says, but I only had good intentions and I just want to help, right? And we know that there's good intentions. That's where we're starting from. Of course we have good intentions. And we sometimes still cause harm. So really an equity filter is a tool for us to use to kind of slow down, to consider ourselves, our own impact, the impacts of our organizations, and really think through how a decision or action could impact folks. So I'm going to hand it over to Yvette now, and she's going to go through some of the example decisions that we've used this for at CASA.
Thanks, Lane. So as Lane showed you all, that is the equity filter that we try to use at CASA whenever we're in a situation that we have to make decisions that has widespread impact. And this is one of the first, I guess, examples that I can remember us using the equity filter was to use it for the forms that you all receive through the portal that are there to assist you and your savers. So the question was, did we want to name the forms that were specifically for Spanish speaking savers that needed to have them in Spanish? If we wanted to name them in English, so it would be in this format with the English name of it and then the Spanish name, or if we would just wanted the Spanish form to be named in Spanish all together. We had a really, really good conversation, I feel like, for this whole process. Again, we did go through those steps of using the filter to kind of go through this. So if Lane, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. We did start with the question of answering surface assumptions, right? And I'll go back to saying that in this meeting, we had people from all different areas of working with the IDA. So we had specialists there who did direct service. We had people who worked in withdrawals, enrollments, folks from Innovative Changes who are not necessarily involved with it, but were Spanish speaking. So there was a lot of input and conversation about how this naming could or couldn't impact folks in different ways. So these are the actual answers that we came up with. So if you can see, you know, the question of how would this increase or decrease racial equity? In some ways, it could force more diversity of hiring Spanish speakers because we do know that is a growing population and there is a higher need for folks to have a second language. So it could push racial equity in that way. Also, not everyone has English as their first language. And if they are a Spanish speaker, having a form sent to you in the language that you understand best could actually make a really big difference versus getting documents sent over to you Even if it is in your language, but it's a different name, it might be something you look over and miss because you weren't able to read it right away. And then some of the adverse impacts here would be that because not all specialists can speak Spanish, they may be the ones that don't get that information or form sent over to clients because they can't read the form right away. And, you know, this could just add that impact of, in the end, the saver is going to be the one that's impacted by that delay in the form getting sent over or whatnot. And they also would have an effect on potentially if things are going to be audited, the way institutions interact with us as well. Also, we would have to have an English version available for them too. So these are some of the responses we came up with for surface assumptions for either naming the forms in Spanish fully or starting it with English and then Spanish. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, and so the valuing of multiple perspectives. So kind of touch on this a little bit, but we did have a lot of folks in this meeting. I believe it was about 6 or 7 people who were bilingual in some capacity and worked within the IDA. And one little asterisk piece I wanted to throw out there was who was missing from this conversation. So going back to what Lane was saying, a lot of the times we make decisions on behalf of, or, you know, just for people who are going to be mostly impacted. One key set of people that we did not include were the savers themselves, and specifically Spanish speaking savers, but also other specialists outside of the CASA, outside of who don't work directly like within CASA. We didn't really take that into consideration of like inviting somebody from an outside partner organization of like, hey, what would you think about getting these forms just in Spanish? Like what kind of impact would that have for you and your work? So we were missing some perspectives in the moment, and these type of decisions, I feel like there's a lot of time. We feel like we don't have time to do everything and get everything in order. But for what it was, I think we did really good. But that is something to definitely keep in mind. And like going forward, something we learned was, you know, we know we didn't have all those perspectives there when we were having this conversation. How do you determine that each perspective was given equal value? We actually used a FIST to 5 rating to come out with our voting outcome. So that way, in the end, it wasn't one person leading the meeting and, you know, we had to wait on that one person to decide yes or no. Everybody had a vote in how we thought was best to go about this. And we just sort of tallied up from there which way to go. And it was about an hour meeting that we were, that we had this conversation and came up with a final decision. So again, if we had more time, more resources to put into this, maybe we could have had like multiple 1-hour sessions with those other perspectives, including the people who were left out, and maybe the decision might have been a little bit different. So this is just a little backdrop of how the analysis of valuing multiple perspectives came from this decision. Lane, if you want to go to the next one. And so going back to, so that was an example of using the equity filter like in real life work. We've actually used it also as well to see if people could bring pets to the office when there were some people on staff who were allergic to pets. We actually ran that decision through the equity filter, and the outcome was to not do it, or if it was to be done, to do it off site, so we wouldn't have to worry about folks in the office who had allergies be impacted. So it's a great tool that you can kind of use it for almost anything and everything. So I would recommend, using it, because the idea is that we're trying to embed equity into all the things in our lives, right? Including the workplace. So one of the questions I feel that we get a lot, especially since that request of ensuring the IDA funds are going to be used to, to uplift and help folks who have been adversely impacted by inequities for a long time, is how do you do that? Like, how do you do that in the IDA program where we can make it a more equitable process? So this next piece is going to talk a little bit about the enrollment process and how at Innovative Changes, some of the things that I did to kind of make those processes more equitable. And I'm starting this off with the definition of targeted universalism. So targeted universalism is basically an approach that it's the equal approach where everybody's going to get the same thing. And while that can be really great and good, a lot of the times it doesn't fully meet the needs of people who may need additional support or help. And sometimes the folks who need more assistance don't necessarily get their needs met from from not having targeted universalism. So having a same way approach to everything doesn't really cover or really acknowledge that there are privileges within different groups of people and people who are at a higher disadvantage. And so what I did is really try to figure out like, what are some of those privileges within the communities that we serve, and how can we filter out a way to reach the most people who are impacted through the different asset classes that we have. So if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Here is something that some of the questions that I have put into the enrollment process to filter out for folks whether they're the best candidate for IDAs or not. So for education savers, is the saver going for their first degree? I don't really know why. I have a feeling what happened was at some point we had some postgraduate savers in our IDA program and the rumor mill started. And so for a long time, I was mostly getting applications for education IDAs for people who were pursuing master's degrees, even PhDs, or they had bachelor degrees already and were going to, try to pivot to a different field and wanted additional education. Given the time, especially right now that we're in, having one degree, having a bachelor's degree in general is a huge privilege. And I know that it doesn't necessarily benefit everyone in the same ways. I know folks who have bachelor's degrees that are not being, employed in the areas they got it for, not making the wages that they were expecting. The student loan debt has definitely had a huge impact on folks who pursued higher education. So there's that piece to also acknowledge and understand, like, where is this person, who is this person applying for this IDA, and where do they sit in all of these things? Those are really important to weigh in how you can, get the people who really need the assistance versus folks who already have some privilege in their life. Even if it's not exactly perfect, like there's still a benefit of having a bachelor's degree versus not having any. And so one of the requirements that I did for the IDA program was that we're not going to do any more enrollments for postgraduate degrees. So folks that I want to be enrolling are people who are pursuing their first degree. And that's going to remove a lot of people and bring in a lot more folks who don't have that piece of, you know, that, not piece of paper, but that degree that adds like that additional security and financial stability that other folks who do have one. And the second question to this was, does a saver qualify for other financial aid? So FAFSA, student loans, state grants. This is for students who are primarily either have DACA or don't have documentation, because if you have access to FAFSA, student loans, and other sources of income, that's a huge privilege, because the students who don't have DACA or other type of documentation, they literally have no aid available for them, really, because almost all, not all, but all federal aid does require you to have documentation. We do now have some state aid to assist those who don't, but there's just a lot more barriers in actually being able to pay and afford college if you don't have it. And so that was another consideration that I put in, is if somebody is applying for the IDA program and they're a student and they don't have financial aid, or they don't have documentations to get financial aid, they should be prioritized, because realistically, the odds of them getting aid for their school, to pay for school, is not very high. A lot of the times they're very, very dependent for scholarships, and scholarships are always not enough to meet the need that's out there for the amount of people that end up applying for them. So that was something I took into consideration as well during the enrollment process. The next set of questions are for retirement savers and how we could sort of make this a little bit more equitable too. Number one question was, does the saver already have an established retirement savings? So I do have people who already had retirement accounts. And the question was, should we only aim to serve people who have zero, or, you know, already have some? And that can vary. And I would say look at it by how much they have saved. Because if they just started a retirement account and had less than 20 grand, like that's still not enough for retirement, right? But if you had somebody that had nothing, they have a higher need. And so it just kind of varies on how much they already had going. I think when you're admitting people, kind of comparing them in that sense to who has the higher need there. The other question I had is this a saver a woman? So as I hope you all know, we do have a gender pay gap. So over the lifetime of a woman, women make less money. They end up taking time out from their career to either start families, raise families. Later on in their life, they take time off to become caretakers for their parents. So there's all this loss of potentially earned income that could be put into savings for retirement that a lot of women don't have. And so retirement is a gendered issue. A lot of women who are seniors are in poverty. I mean, we have a really high rate of seniors in poverty as it is, but a lot of them are particularly women. And so gender preference there, if you have retirement folks who are coming in, like how could you reach women, right? When you're enrolling for retirement IDAs, how can you reach folks who don't have any savings? This last question is a little bit tricky. So is the saver documented? Again, there's just so many barriers in general for folks who don't have documents to really have any type of financial security and safety. And it gets even trickier when trying to open any type of investment accounts, because a lot of them do require documentation. But my plug is, I do know that the Oregon Saves Plan, you can open IRAs with them. So there is a way to help folks who don't. And so these are just like all the questions here that I would ask, like when enrolling retirement savers, like do they fall in any of these categories? And if so, like, how should I prioritize them? So this is just some examples of questions you could ask while you're enrolling savers that will have, you know, impacts in the overall work of doing equity and like trying to help folks that are haven't been helped on the scale that others have, and really trying to like you know, get resources and to people that really, really need it. Link, could you go to the next slide?
Yvette, just a quick reminder, you will have a question here ready for you once you're done.
Okay. Yes. So, and well, we could do that, I think. Well, let me see the question first. Do you have a way to get through these steps quickly for time-sensitive materials like monthly newsletter? Okay, I'm gonna go back to that, but I'll get to it at the end. What are other ways you can make decisions during the enrollment process that may be more equitable? So this is just a question I'm leaving for you all to ponder. So the examples I gave were some of the questions that I brought in for education and retirement savers. Depending on your asset type, there might be other criteria that you think about or look into when you're making this enrollment process. So what we're hoping is that, you know, you come away from this training with tools that you can start implementing, you know, through your own work. And so those are just some of the examples of how we, you know, made some decisions, you know, regarding forms and through the enrollment process. So I just want to leave you with that.
I'm going to jump back in here. Thank you so much, Yvette. Those were really helpful explanations. And I'll do my best to answer Suzanne's question real quick, and then maybe Yvette can also take a swipe at it. But my answer is that for decisions that need to be made really quickly, one thing that I like to do is to try and answer one question from each bubble, because then it's only 4 questions instead of like 15. So that's kind of one way you could do it. Another is to have like a kind of a decision-making body, like you guys are who we're going to go to when we need a decision. So whether that's, you know, committee or whatever at your work, that you could say like, all right, group that's who's supposed to make the decision, you have 2 days, please do it as fast as you can. That's the other way that you could kind of do it. That way you don't have to create a meeting and everything. We definitely want to plug some upcoming trainings. You should have seen it in your inboxes, but CEI, NP, and CASA are going to be hosting 2 trainings coming up. September 25th from 1 to 4 and October 8th from 9 to 11:30. I did hear that you are able to attend one of them and not the other. So if you can only sign up for one, that's okay. Ideally, we'd love to have you for both. And that is a live link if y'all want to try to sign up through these presentations, but I think you'll probably do better to go into your email and register. And then kind of why are we talking about this again? Eventually we are going to be using demographic data to analyze where money is going from the IDA initiative and whether or not it's getting to the communities who need it most. So one thing that we know is that as an initiative, we can do better at supporting savers. And that's one of the reasons we're looking at enrollments versus graduations, is that we actually do a pretty good job of enrolling a pretty diverse group of folks. We don't always do quite as well with graduating them. So what other parts of your program can you look at? Can you design differently with an equity filter? And then I put a little tweet on here from Jason Kander. He has his whole use your platform, grab an oar thing, which is that we all have impact on the world around us, and that by understanding our own power and impact, we actually are given a lot more agency, and it also helps us realize the ways that we could be harming or helping the world around us. So I would like to take any other questions we have now. I got a little insecure GIF in here of somebody trying to use some AAVE and not doing it very well. So again, intent versus impact. You don't always know how the things that you're going to say will sit with somebody. So Yvette, did you want to take a shot at the quick decisions question?
I definitely agree with everything that you said. And the one other thing I would add is that if it's really something that is like, I need to make a decision now, and you really have no time, is you're going to make that decision, but make time to reflect on it. If you are in a position where you're like, I'm not totally sure what is the right one to do, and you literally have no time, you're going to have to make the decision, but make the time to go back and reflect. Because a lot of what we did too with the Spanish naming form is looking back, like, okay, who was missing? Did we give ourselves enough times? What way could we have done it, differently for the future? So just going back and taking the time to do that. So when you are posed with a similar decision like that again, you can kind of think back like, oh yeah, this happened. I should ask for more time, or I should include this person, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another way to practice this, is if you are not in the space where you could do it in the moment, and don't have the time to kind of do all this beforehand, you could use this as an evaluation tool to look at what were some of the decisions that you made in the past, and was it equitable or not.
Thanks, Yvette, for bringing that in. And I went back to this filter that shows the slide with the evaluate box on here too. Once data is gathered, what are we doing with it? Who will we share it with? And what did we learn? What other action needs to be taken? So we also had an I team, an implementation team that worked through some policy decisions. And a big part of that I thought went really well was coming back 3 months later to look at it and say, okay, this is what we thought would happen. Now it's been 3 months. Did that happen? Is that what we expected? Is the outcome what we had predicted it would be? Is there something we should do differently next time? So I think that that's a really big part of it too, is that, we're all imperfect. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that are not as good as they could have been. And that's fine. And ideally, we could come back later and say, what would we do differently next time? Do we have other questions? Nanette says, I don't even know what a fleek is. I had better ask my kids, LOL. Yeah, go look at Urban Dictionary. Are we going to get a copy of the slides? I know the training is being recorded, but this would be a good slide for reference later. Yes, all the slideshows from this partner training are going to go up on the portal, as well as the recording. So I would definitely recommend that you go back and look at these slides, and feel free to grab any of these questions for your own filter, or to change them up for something that works better for the population that you're working with. And again, this is one of many tools, right? This is kind of just putting it, taking another perspective on things.
5 minutes.
All right. Does anyone have any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas they would like to ask in the last 5 minutes here? All right. I'd be curious, show of hands or in the chat, has anybody used a equity filter at their own organization? Yeah, seen a couple yeses, a couple thumbs up. Okay. All right, so not totally new info, but and who feels like they might use an equity filter after this training today? All right. Couple more folks. Great. You know, I think that one of the things that we definitely could talk about more in our field in general is power dynamics, decision making, who holds power and how. And for me, this tool is a really great way to examine some of those dynamics. And as Yvette mentioned with the Fist to 5 and the voting, these can also be used in conjunction with other power sharing tools. So in a Fist to 5 situation, we're just kind of testing. Fist is, I hate it, I want nothing to do with it. 5 is, I love it, it's perfect. And by doing that Fist to 5 from everybody in the group, you get a range of opinions and you can see kind of where people stand. And then we wouldn't move forward with a decision if there were any zeros. So anybody who is completely against it, we're like, okay, well, we have to go back and look more at this. But just another example of some good tools that folks can use. All right, friends. Well, if there are not any other questions, concerns, ideas, we might just take off and see you in the next session at 11. All right.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you all.
Bye. Hector, you're going to be the last man standing. You're muted.
Just making sure everybody leaves. Just kidding.
All right.
I'm
I'll get
about
out
to
of
end
your
it.
hair.
Okay.
Okay.